So he's going to talk us into the Assange Wikileaks story. And I've got to emphasize that what this is, it's an interim report. We're relying on you a lot to come up with questions that we'll endeavor to answer. We want a discussion. We'll get the discussion quite soon. But let's start with Michael Parenti.
Can you give me the screen there? Yeah. So I'm one of these copy leftist remix pop culture sort of guys, and last year when WikiLeaks sort of exploded onto the screen with the release of the Collateral Murder video, I had this idea to remix the V for Vendetta poster and did A for Assange, basically. And it was sort of like an internet meme that everybody was associating Assange with Anonymous, and so it was sort of an obvious thing for me. And this was the first mix that I did, and it went up on the internet. Somebody grabbed it on 4chan, and then it was just like all of a sudden all over the world. And so I started doing other covering WikiLeaks sort of like editorially and putting together the different internet memes that happened. And the classic one was when somebody released a Rickroll cable from Cablegate. So you clicked on, this is the ultra secret cable, and you clicked on it and you got the text to Never Gonna Give You Up from Rick Astley, which is a classic. So of course I had to do Assange as Rick Astley. And this got covered by Boing Boing, and they did a record review of it, and that sort of like launched me into having a followership that was interested in seeing what was going on with Assange. So I went through and started taking different album covers, different film posters, and always sort of commenting on the phenomenon Assange. And so here's another British reference from Julian Cope, which is known as the St. Julian album. And mixed together with that is the van from the Collateral Murder video and the people standing around, which is, so people are viewing Assange as this like saint figure that came to save the world. And so each of these are little elements of what was going on as WikiLeaks developed into the public consciousness. The shoot the messenger meme, or the Frankie Goes to Hollywood here, when the movie started happening. People wanting to shoot the messenger is the Elton John, Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player. And the next one here is when Julian came to England and was arrested and everybody was saying free Assange, was the clash tag, where there was a big clash between everybody. And of course, people were angry about what happened, so I just figured they could blow me. It's one of my favorites. This is sort of like the Cultural Revolution graphics that were happening back in China. The Great Leap Forward is the Great Leap Forward. This is supposedly Julian's favorite piece of what I've done. It seems to speak to his ego. The Don't Be a Prisoner is the allegory of Plato's cave, that we're not really seeing what's going on, that we're only seeing the shadows of what's actually happening in the world. So there's all this mythology that surrounds Julian Assange. We see him from a distance, and he's this sort of like mythical character to a lot of people, and he brings together a lot of different aspects of what's going on. This is an association with Marshall McLuhan, how media changes. So opening up media is also changing the paradigm of media. When Bank of America and PayPal and MasterCard shut everybody down from donating to WikiLeaks, and they said, well, why don't you, we can now bring money through Western Union. So this is a Western Union remix. Come on, Mr. Internet. But my favorite ones are the movie posters. I'm going to click back here and I'll bring you through all of them. My site is esp.artificialize.tv, which is where you can see these remixes. I'm going to give a couple here movie remixes and a couple book remixes, and then I'll give over to the next person to introduce themselves. Citizen Assange is a remix of Citizen Kane. That one was, his last word was Rosebud, So here is his last word was rubber hose, which was the code that Adrian wrote years ago as a hacker that got him famous on the hacker scene. And so he sort of epitomizes many different archetypical characters in his various incarnations. He's a very fun character to play with as an artist. When Bank of America made their war room, when they thought that Assange was going to release this bank data, I remixed Dr. Strangelove into Dr. Strangeleak. And these are all of the bank directors from Bank of America sitting in the Dr. Strangelove war room, you know, getting worried about being attacked by WikiLeaks. And this is a great British reference when the little piss fest between Nick Davies and Julian started going along, and Heather Brooke was in the mix, and you know, all of this sort of like personal stuff I did. The body and presents gone with the wiki, the little romance and stuff. So I've been able to have a lot of fun in commenting on the WikiLeaks phenomenon, and as a result of that, I've gotten to meet a number of the key characters have just seemed to have run over my path, and I've done interviews with them and have a little bit more of a I've been able to get a more of a personal view of these public characters than most of us do in the public. This is the 6 Degrees of Separation. This is a remix of the book of 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, and this one was done when Twitter subpoenaed the data of the Twitter 3 to get at Julian Assange. So it's just very easy to take pop cultural references and apply them to Assange.
Which actually brings us exactly to the film I'm making, which is about Birgitte Jonsdottir, who's one of the Twitter 3, I haven't heard them call that, but is the subject of a U.S. Department of Justice subpoena for her social network information. My name's Judith Ehrlich, and I'm the co-producer-director of a film called The Most Dangerous Man in America, Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, which is celebrating its 40th anniversary this week with finally the declassification of the 7,000 pages of top secret documents that Daniel Ellsberg released to the New York Times. So that story 40 years ago has sort of led me to this story of the whistleblower of the 21st century, Julian Assange, and beyond that to Birgitte Jonsdottir, who I think is sort of representing taking the principles of WikiLeaks and making them into public policy and into the law of the land of Iceland, where she's a member of parliament. She was the producer of the collateral murder video with Assange. And I'm now looking at the process that she's part of, leading actually, to pass a number of laws which will make Iceland into a free haven for both whistleblowers and for anyone who wants to assure their personal
We'll
privacy.
get on to...
Oh, sorry.
No, we'll
Yeah.
interrogate you later about the
okay.
efficacy of the free haven. But
How I got
I've just
to
said,
this.
initially, I'd like to know how you got to that. The second question I have is there seems to be a strong element of, how you put it, kind of craziness of people around the whole. Everyone who's had anything to do with the WikiLeaks story seems to emerge borderline crazy and or eccentric. I mean, has this been your view of the whole story? How have you encountered WikiLeaks?
Yeah, I think that wouldn't be too far from the truth. I think there's a lot of eccentricity, at least, and possibly mental illness involved with the whole story. I think that, I came to this because Dan Ellsberg called me one day and said, Julian Assange just invited me to a press conference in London, come with me. And I had already started thinking about this film when I was at the Sydney Film Festival,
right.
and Bradley Manning went underground. And suddenly Dan became the spokesperson for WikiLeaks, and I was sort of catapulted into this story. And I was, sorry.
And there are about, like, 12, is it, separate efforts to chronicle WikiLeaks going on?
Yes, and my sales agent said, don't ever mention WikiLeaks because there's too many stories about WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
So this is not a film about WikiLeaks I'm making. It's a film about not WikiLeaks. But anyway, it starts with WikiLeaks.
Well, it's a film about the culture surrounding WikiLeaks, or yeah?
Well, about the principles that WikiLeaks
principles, okay.
advances, I think. I mean, it's something I've been involved with civil liberties issues
Okay.
for my whole life, and also issues of conscience, of crisis of conscience. So I think those are the kinds of things that interest me. And I sort of see my story as WikiLeaks in high heels and backwards, kind of how a woman
Sounds
might
great.
approach this story and tell the story through her eyes.
That sounds great. Well, I'm going to go next to James Ball, who was actually described to me, both, I have to say, the two people sitting on my right were described to me as one of the few people sane surrounding the whole WikiLeaks story. But I have to say that there are other people who are so described to me, and when I met them, they didn't quite seem as sane as I'd been told. But James, can you explain, how did you get involved in all this? Because you work for The Guardian now, but you didn't when the whole WikiLeaks thing started.
No. So my first substantive encounter with Julian came when I was working for an outfit called the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, who were keen to get hold of the Iraq war logs. And we'd had a dinner, a group of us, and it had come to a sort of fairly sparsely decorated room in northwest London, connected to someone not a million miles away. And it was about 1 o'clock on a Sunday morning, 1 a.m., and Julian had just agreed to hand us the Iraq War documents to try and make...
when does this happen? This happened 6 months ago.
Oh, this must be, I think it was early July last year.
Oh, yeah.
And for what turned out to be a Channel 4 dispatches, 2 hours of television on Al Jazeera, and IraqWarlogs.com, which just won an Amnesty Award. And so Julian, kind of after this 3-4 hour grilling, had decided he was going to give us the material, and so I'm sort of sat there, and he finally hands over this USB stick with 391,000 confidential US records. And I go
as one does.
As one does. So I go to leave, and he sort of pauses and goes, where were you planning to go from here? And sort of look cautiously, home. And he went, no, if you can, don't go home for at least a few hours. I don't want your address connected to here. Not that many places to go at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night with 390,000 military documents in your pocket. I just really didn't want to have to explain losing them in a club cloakroom. So I had to rock up to a friend's door claiming to have lost my keys. She paused, kind of looked at me a bit confused, and sort of went, but you're not drunk. 10 weeks later, when I sort of confessed the truth, she sort of laughed and was really pleased to have been involved, and then stopped and went, so you didn't want to lead the CIA to your door, but you were happy to take them to mine. But yes, so after that, I eventually, to be involved with the cables, Julian essentially said, if you want to do it, you need to work for WikiLeaks. I took advice from several people, most of whom said don't do it. Did it on the understanding it wouldn't be for long, and that turned out to be the case. And
what was working for them like? I mean, you got paid all right, or?
I got paid some of what I was owed eventually, which
the Guardian
is a reasonably familiar proposition, I think, to anyone involved with WikiLeaks financially. But it's surreal. It's roughly 18, 19 hours a day, often living in Vaughan's house, which, again, camp bed up in Norfolk is a little different from Officers Biking's place. It's a chaotic and unruly little thing. I think people really forget just how small and scrappy WikiLeaks is, and how difficult that makes the scale of what it's doing.
Wait. How small and scrappy they are? I thought they were a worldwide legion of volunteers. 1,000 people is what it is that I read all the time.
I'm sure you read that all the time. It's usually about 7 or 8 people in a room. It's 7 or 8 on a good day.
Before we get to the point, tell us a bit about, is there a discernible atmosphere, or you can't really call it a corporate culture? I mean, is WikiLeaks like a sort of cult or sect?
It unfortunately takes on those characteristics. I think essentially anyone who disagrees with Julian in anything but the most delicate ways doesn't stay around for very long or stops expressing dissent. And so you kind of have the kind of culture which actually, in some ways, weakens Julian's strengths and exacerbates his weaknesses. You either agree with him and get on with it, or you don't. There's not people in there who can challenge him, and the best organisational cultures happen when people can be challenged. The Bay of Pigs happened because no one moved from the groupthink. It just, you look through history,
Let's
and it's
imagine
how it works.
I'm here for induction. If you're inducting me into WikiLeaks, what I kind of want to know is ultimately what am I signing up to, apart from trouble at immigration authorities when I go in the United States? Is it at any point, is there a discussion about what this organization actually exists for and how it's going to change the world?
No, generally when someone first turned up, in my experience, they would have a day or so not really knowing why they were there, not really having anyone talk to them, trying to sit in the corner while everyone gets on with things, and until they sort of work out roughly what people want them to do, sometimes just by osmosis.
So it's just like The Guardian or BBC.
Yeah, actually, it's a lot like The Guardian in that respect. But that's one of the sort of odder aspects of it. There would sort of occasionally, after several days, there'd be some kind of meeting with a rough plan set out for the next 4 or 5 days that would never be stuck to. I mean, it's chaotic. There's no structure, there's no procedures, there's no policies, there's nothing on anything.
Do you have purpose discussions? Like, do you have, this is what we do in the world, philosophical discussions?
There's certainly ideological discussions. It would be wrong to suggest that. I think,
can you recreate one for me in shorthand?
One of the big ones was what happens with the residual cable material. At the minute, I think we're at about 13,000 of the 250,000 cables released. And every cable a news organisation has seen, has checked for harm minimisation, redacted and so on. And the pragmatists there were essentially of the view that you will never ever get a media organisation willing to go through and do all 250,000, including the ones that aren't newsworthy. And so the decision comes, does it put up this potentially very harmful material blind and just put it out there? Does it look for some other way to redact it, to crowdsource it, something like that, which is incredibly difficult? Or does it accept that maybe it won't put all of them up? And that very quickly descended into quite an aggressive argument, as these things tend to. I mean, as when you work with campaigners who are very passionate about anything.
Do you have money discussions? Like, do you ask yourselves inside WikiLeaks, how do we actually monetize this organization and make sure it gets enough cash in to survive?
There's never discussions, there are sometimes requests. Julian is particularly keen to try and monetize things. I think for the organisation, not personal gain, but he's certainly looked at whether he could get money from news organisations for material, and also looked at whether he can get money for interviews with him. In terms of an actual strategy, no.
Okay, well, I'll come back to, anyway. Vaughan, you are depicted in the press, I know you to be a great English gentleman and espouser of not lost causes but good causes and pragmatic causes. But and indeed, as you all know, that the Frontline Club is very valuable, existed as a host to everything WikiLeaks represents, in a, to my mind, a thoroughly good way. But you've also looked after Julian in your house with great generosity. Can you say, how does the organisation seem to you now, having started as an object of interest and certain compassion, how do you see WikiLeaks and the WikiLeaks phenomenon now as a consequence of your experience?
That's quite an interesting question. But what I would say is, it is, yes, I don't think they will in business schools necessarily be studying it and learning from it, but it has been extraordinarily effective for all this apparent chaos. Julian is a very strong character, certainly, and I think it's problematic when we try to separate him too much. I mean, there's this kind of, we like to try and separate him from WikiLeaks, but I think that's quite hard to do. I think he really is the inspiration for it, and that troubles a lot of people. But actually, I think it is remarkable how they have, the strength of the idea is so extraordinary, they're managing to make an impact, an extraordinary impact across the world. They're
Just
releasing in
just
50
let me-
countries.
Let me ask you, when you say the strength of the idea, in a sentence, like, what is the idea that's so strong?
In a sentence, effectively, he's a secure conduit for whistleblowers.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Okay, well, I mean, basically, the only thing that's happened since WikiLeaks came into the public consciousness is the Cablegate release. There's no submission process anymore. There's nothing else being released or managed. I hear whistleblowers complaining all the time that they can't get data to WikiLeaks.
Well, they're only on, was it cables 17,000 or something like that? I mean, I think there's still a lot of Cablegate, and I think they're quite busy, and they are, a small organization. And an organization under extraordinary siege as well. I mean, I think, it's rather like, I'm a military man, I was a soldier once, and you look at the various models for fighting conflicts, and insurgents do it differently than regular armies, and in a sense, they've been incredibly robust. But I think there's a problem. There's a tendency for us to expect them to be perfect somehow, isn't it? And I think it's our failing, not theirs. And there's this sort of human instinct that we expect them to have all the solutions, and we're critical that they may not be able to or may not be able to accept submissions. Well, their cash flow is completely interrupted. They're under extraordinary
You
slander.
mean their cash flow is interrupted by the fact that the people wanting to donate them, these
Well,
were
that's
blocked?
pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, it's
pretty
difficult,
difficult to do. So essentially, I think one's got to judge them for the situation they're in to understand. And sure, if they're not taking submissions, hopefully next year they will.
But the argument is, and that Domscheit-Berg made, is that the reason why
Just
they're
for
on
the
siege-
people who don't know, Domscheit-Berg is a very high-minded German ex-associate of Julian Assange, who decided that Julian Assange was unworkable with and wrote a very critical book about him. Anyway.
So, I mean, that's exactly the reason why Daniel left, is because he said that Julian was getting in the way of the organization. Exactly. I mean, for that reason.
Well, we haven't seen Julian's version of events, so I think we should accept that we've seen Daniel Domscheit's version, and there may well be an alternative version to that story.
So on the sort of specific issue of WikiLeaks for whistleblowing, I mean, WikiLeaks has been nowhere near ready to accept submissions for now a year.
So you mean they've new whistleblowers
And
can't come?
the argument that's made is that Domscheit-Berg kept the code, which is not the case. There is a working submission process available at WikiLeaks, from what I understand. And when I interviewed Daniel and asked him about the 9 gigabytes of data, which Assange had claimed Daniel was holding ransom and hostage, he told me straight, eye to eye, Julian can have the data anytime he wants. All he has to do is come and pick it up. I've called his lawyers in London. I've called his lawyers in Germany. He refuses to take the data that he accuses me of holding hostage. And I did this publicly, and there was no response from Assange.
I think the Daniel Julian bun fight is had in enough places online. I mean, what I was actually looking to ask is, WikiLeaks does spend a reasonable amount of its time trying to encourage or discourage anyone blowing the whistle or leaking to anyone else. It criticises the Wall Street Journal system, Al Jazeera system, any other news organisation. WikiLeaks is the only place you can leak to.
I'd like to bring Judith in on this. Judith, Judith's film, by the way, about Ellsberg is terrific. And it's about the golden age of leaking. I mean, when you just had to do one massive leak, endangering yourself, putting yourself at risk to spend 30 years in prison.
115 years.
115 years, all right, sorry about that. But it even in her film, there are some doubts about the impact of the leaks. But Judith, when you look with your background, it almost seems like there's a sort of market growing up in managing or not managing whistleblowers or acting as intermediaries for whistleblowers. Is that really what's going on? Are you cool about that? You're happy about that? Or you think, on the whole, it's not a very good idea?
Whistleblowing itself.
Well, no, not whistleblowing,
or
but
the
sort of
market, a way to
how you
market.
handle or how you market yourself around receiving what some people would say were stolen goods.
Well, my sense is, well, two things. President Obama has been the worst president in American history on the issue of whistleblowing. He's indicted now 5 whistleblowers, 2 that go back into the Bush years. Of course, he didn't indict Cheney for something that really did probably damage national security, the Valerie Plame whistleblowing. But so in the United States, whistleblowing has become even more dangerous than it has been in the past. My sense is that WikiLeaks is a brilliant idea that launched the possibility of whistleblowing online, and it might become out of, not the way that it's done. I know the Wall Street Journal's talking about a portal. I think
So
the New
is
York
the
Times
BBC.
talking about it.
Less than convincing,
and
I think.
BBC.
Yeah.
No one's really, I guess the Wall Street Journal one has been launched, right? Can you now leak to the Wall Street Journal? So I think that, it's going to be superseded by the print having their own black box. I mean, the ideas
do you
can
believe
be
in this?
duplicated.
Do you actually believe that
Yes.
places like New York Times?
Yes, I think that these
Well-
are important. I mean, the idea of whistleblowing online, I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to make government more transparent.
Actually, this is
and
very, very
corporations.
scary with WikiLeaks, the Wall Street Journal, Al Jazeera, wherever does it. This idea that there is a magic, secure website that you can send to is a complete, total misnomer.
I agree with
it's
you,
not
too.
true.
Yeah.
Not even WikiLeaks worked. The things that will incriminate you are taking the data off your company computer, is sending something on an email, is the files you access from your computer, is the files you print from your work computer. All of that is logged. The way they will catch you is not by looking at the internet connection between you and whoever you leak to. It's how you get the material in the first place, and usually who you talk to afterwards. I mean, WikiLeaks' highest profile source is in prison, or alleged source is in prison. It's,
As well
Yeah,
as
but not through his relationship with WikiLeaks.
But this is the thing. It's never that link. It's not the fact that there is no secure way to pass a document from one person to another that is what prevents whistleblowing. WikiLeaks' strength was never this magic, secure, encrypted donation button, and every organisation going out there and copying it is making a mistake. I think WikiLeaks sometimes thinks that's its strength. WikiLeaks' strength is that it's uncensorable.
But do you
and
think it is
untakedown.
possible? Do you think it's
uncensored?
possible? Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, no,
Do you
no,
think
no.
it's possible to create a really secure whistleblower site?
I think no. In fact, no. I think the issue is the way people will incriminate themselves is always getting the information in the first place. And that is not a problem you can solve technologically remotely. I think what you have to do is be very honest and say, here are ways you can reduce your risk if there is some material you want to leak, and then work responsibly with people to find a safe solution for them. In terms of transmission, your safest way is probably to burn it on the CD and post it, even with WikiLeaks, even with encryption, whatever. But I think it's actually much more about saying, this is a risk. If you blow the whistle, you are taking a risk and a courageous one, not if you do this, we have the best encryption system, no one else does, it will be safe.
Does The Guardian actually have a whistleblowers site up yet?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Are they going to have one or not?
I honestly don't know. There are
I
discussions.
think you should write a piece for The Guardian about, 50 things you should know if you aspire to be a whistleblower, i.e., how to end up in jail as a consequence.
I think that would possibly be a good idea. I think
Very good G2 article.
one thing Alan Rusbridger has said, which is quite wise, is that The Guardian has been a channel for whistleblowers for 190 years. And so has all the press. I mean, whistleblowing isn't new. WikiLeaks isn't even the first secure submissions online site. There's John Young's, I have no idea how it's said phonetically, is it Cryptome or Cryptobe? Cryptome, which has been doing it for over a decade. In fact, about 15 years.
I think can we maybe have the house lights up and take some questions? If no one want to ask questions, we go on talking, but I think it would be good. Please, some lights. Yeah, but can you identify who you are? And can we have some lights, please?
House lights up.
There you go.
Okay,
Hi.
thanks a lot.
I just had a question about people who have uploaded things to WikiLeaks, and you mentioned that the man in Germany has some of them holding them ransom. So does that also mean that those whistleblowers who have not had their information made public, who uploaded to WikiLeaks, are at risk in any way? Does WikiLeaks have a way to know?
Maybe say who you are as well.
Sorry,
please.
Vivian Norris, Huffington Post. But also curious because knowing people who've uploaded to WikiLeaks, things that
So
have not been
specifically with that data, when Assange and Domscheit-Berg split up, Assange left the country and didn't take the data with him that had been uploaded to WikiLeaks at that time. The data is supposedly on a secure hard drive in an unknown location and in a secure location and is waiting to be accepted by WikiLeaks, and none of the people at OpenLeaks are using the data or planning on releasing the data through their own site. That's the closest information that I have about the previously leaked data to WikiLeaks prior to the split of Domscheit-Berg and Assange.
I would sound one note of caution, which is that some material has, through ex-WikiLeakers or associates of OpenLeak and so on, has been given out to other organisations or other people. I think it's reasonably well known. Heather Brooke got a full copy of the embassy cables through someone who was subsequently named as an associate of Daniel Domscheit-Berg. Other material also slipped out of WikiLeaks control, again, possibly through that channel, possibly through others. I would say WikiLeaks doesn't have a complete grasp on its material, and given some of the places material have ended up, possibly through OpenLeaks or elsewhere, it doesn't seem they have a complete grip on it either. I mean, once something's held by more than a couple of people.
Well, let's be honest here. I mean, once there's a digital copy of anything in the world, it's the same issue that any copyrights holder faces, or any of us. We create something digitally and transmit it. At the point of transmission, you never know if copies are being made. So,
Okay, question then. After that, I'd like to go to Tom Koch, sitting in the front row. Yes.
My name's Pete Fine. I'm with Telecomics. I was wondering if you guys could comment a little bit on the furor that WikiLeaks has provoked, especially in light of the fact that it seems that there's remarkably little new in these cables. Like, if you've been paying attention, you know, we knew the U.S. government was shilling for Monsanto. We knew the Israelis were screwing the Palestinians over and such. And so why the outrage, given the sort of lack of really anything new in this material?
You should, yes. We're going to start with Vaughan.
What do you mean, nothing new? That's extraordinary thing to say. I find that odd. You know, I've got something here, actually. We did a little look at it at the Frontline Club. I got someone to look at it. On February the 17th, we found 50 stories that we thought were frankly stunning. That's 3.5 months ago. I mean, it includes Obama administration working with the Republicans to protect the Bush administration officials facing criminal investigation into torture. You know, secret information given. Sorry, I can't read this. I need my glasses. First set of glasses. I'm getting used to them. Secret permission. The United States was secretly given permission by Yemen's president to attack Al Qaeda group in his country. Trafigura. That was a huge toxic waste story in Abidjan. British government training Bangladeshi paramilitary forces to murder people. Shell infiltrating the highest level of government in Nigeria. I mean, look, I can go on, but I just don't agree with you.
I ask Judith that I read somewhere that I think it was in the New York Times actually, that the WikiLeaks cables represented the State Department as a collection of quite amiable New York Times reading gentlemen who usually flew business class, and ladies flew business class, with substantial amounts of luggage, and attempted to set the world to rights. In other words, it didn't show any conspiracies in particular, and it also showed that, on the whole, people within the State Department working for the US government are quite decent people. Judith, is that true or not?
Well, the State Department has asked us to be on tour with our film on Daniel Ellsberg, which set a little storm at Fox News about that. But I thought
as a hero of theirs, no?
Yeah, which I don't know, hero. At least they wanted us to represent the United States government as a film in their docurama. They take 12 films around the world. As representatives of the U.S. State Department, and they asked us to be part of that tour. So, I'm no expert on the State Department outside that, but one thing I did want to say was I think that the whole WikiLeaks, I think there is a lot of revelations and an amazing amount of material that's been leaked, but I also think that what's so shocking to me is that Daniel Ellsberg, when we first went on tour with this film, would get up at the end of every Q&A and say, anyone out there got anything you'd like to leak? No one's leaked anything in 40 years. How about now? And it got to be this joke. And then suddenly Julian Assange arrived. And after 40 years, when there had been no leaks, suddenly it's as if we've been leaking all the way in between. Well, there hasn't been really much. And it really took the courage of someone like Bradley Manning willing to spend his life in prison or be executed, as Dan Ellsberg had been willing to do that. There is no safe way to leak, and I think it does take a lot of courage to do it.
I want to just go to James. James, that Ariana Huffington said, in some, I think on her own site, that she regretted the fact that all the coverage of the WikiLeaks had been about WikiLeaks. That one of the reasons that you may not be aware of so many remarkable things coming out of all these leaks is that people covered the process of the leaking. And in a way that has happened to The Guardian too, hasn't it? It's received all these prizes, really, not really for the stories it broke, but for the fact that it did break the stories. Is that an accurate observation?
I think there's two things going on, really. I think there is a genuinely depressing, sneering culture of cynicism which likes to which likes to equivocate suspecting something with knowing it, which likes to say, oh yeah, we all knew that was going on. It's fine, yeah, you can think any kind of bad thing about your government and people will believe it. That's very different from having evidenced claims. I mean, within, say, just the Iraq material, you had signs that the US had chronicled 300 documented allegations of torture against their own by their own troops and 1,300 against Iraqi police and army they trained. 1,300, including people with drill holes in their kneecap and untreated gunshot wounds, and continued turning over prisoners to that administration and to those prisons under President Obama. That is a war crime. I mean, did you think President Obama was committing war crimes before those things came out? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. It's, it might be a technical thing, it might be whatever, but there was so much stuff in there. But it is true that, firstly, media outlets who don't get a story like to shoot it down. It's the classic thing. It's just how the world works. And to be honest, WikiLeaks often does the same thing. I mean, it's an oddly conventional organisation sometimes. But yes, we all like the process story. We all like the soap opera that is WikiLeaks. I think sometimes, actually, WikiLeaks doesn't really want to move itself out of the way of its stories. It doesn't really object. I mean, there is a condition at the minute. If you as a news organisation want access to the cables, on the first day, you run an interview with Julian Assange that has a huge list of questions that you ain't got to ask. That isn't somewhere that's trying to put the story above the process. Yes, to different extents, the mainstream media is guilty of telling the Julian Assange story, the WikiLeaks story, but that's the story Julian Assange wants to be told as well. It's sad.
Yeah, I should add that I attended some seminar of the editor of The Guardian who, I mean, The Guardian is a rival story in a way to the WikiLeaks story, isn't it? There's a We Are Heroes story coming out of The Guardian, which is
There's so many egos at play here.
And Russ Bridges said, by the way, that he was asked who was going to play Julian Assange in the Hollywood version of the film. I mean, nobody asked him at this seminar who's going to play him, but he replied without missing a beat, Tilda Swinton. So I think that gives you some idea of the levels of antagonism between The Guardian and WikiLeaks.
I think it's worth noting that Alan Rusbridger did say in a public forum that if it ever came to WikiLeaks being prosecuted over the leaks and over the substance of what it does, he would stand shoulder to shoulder. And I think that's really what counts. Yes, okay, fine, there's personal animus, whatever. I don't think Alan really has any. I think other people there might. But come on. I mean, on the substance of it, we agree. And I think people might accuse The Guardian of being pleased with itself, but
that's all right.
The Guardian was there right at the start. I mean, the reason the media collaboration between the five orgs happened was Nick Davies meeting Julian Assange in a cafe in Brussels. That wasn't the tactic before then. And so yes, there were more people than Julian who were instrumental to making the whole thing happen.
Okay. Tom, do you want to add something? You work for WGBH. My God, what's this?
Well,
Maybe your question.
Well, no, may I just interrupt here and just say, look, we shouldn't just be so centric on, the American and the European press, or really the British press. I mean, this is a Greek paper, Tania. There's about 32 front pages there, from WikiLeaks. There's nearly 30 front pages of the Hindu. It isn't just about our press and its sort of liberal cynicism. It's much more than that. And actually, I mean, there was a poll by Ipsos, whatever it was, 24-country poll, where 84% of people had name recognition of Julian Assange. Even in the US, 40% of people supported WikiLeaks. There's something happening here that's actually quite interesting. For all the kind of the squeamishness that we might have, and all the members of the press and these liberal people who find that it's better to kind of be pro-WikiLeaks but kind of anti-Julian. It's a more comfortable position. It's a less courageous position, I would argue, as well. It's more approved by one's peers. It seems nuanced and things like that. But actually, it's not necessarily good enough, I'm afraid. Fundamentally, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are having the most extraordinary effect internationally. They're leaking in 50 countries. And actually, they're much more popular there. And I just feel that we shouldn't just be focusing on the Western media's, and you have to remember, the media have a dog in this race. It's a pretty insecure one.
Tom, you want to come in? You have a dog in this race, certainly.
For those of you who...
Identify yourself, stand
I'm sorry,
up.
I'm Tom Koch. I'm
Speak to the crowds.
Vice President of Distribution for PBS. But something we discovered, for those of you who don't know, about 2 weeks ago, it was reported, and I know this for a fact because it appeared on the PBS NewsHour website and on the Frontline website, not the Frontline Club, but the Frontline Current Affairs program in the United States. And what we discovered was that Tupac Shakur is alive and well in New Zealand. And he's living with Biggie Smalls. How do I know that? Because it was on the websites. But how did it get there? Well, it got there because we were hacked. We were hacked as a result of a program that we aired on Frontline 2 weeks ago called Wiki Secrets, which really was an examination and I think a fairly sensible one of Bradley Manning and his somewhat tortured and difficult upbringing, difficult adolescence, his difficulties in the army, his sexuality, various issues he was confronting, and it really kind of asks the question, who was Bradley Manning? It's really not about WikiLeaks, although there's a very good section in there about how the Guardian backed up the New York Times before how the Guardian sort of came to the New York Times rescue in a way at one point. So there's a really nice piece in that. Simultaneous to the airing of the story, believe it or not, WikiLeaks put up a 52-minute rebuttal in which Assange interviews Marty Smith, who's the producer of Wiki Secrets, and they put it up immediately. And it's wonderful viewing if you watch the piece, the Frontline piece, and then watch the rebuttal on WikiLeaks. It's really fascinating viewing. But what also happened is that on the Frontline website, we have a place for people to comment, dissent, put up whatever view they want, and it's quite open, and it's quite lively, people's reactions to the film. We think that's quite fair, that people have a forum where they can, thumbs up, thumbs down about a film, but some people didn't like it. They didn't like it to the effect that they decided, I think somewhat, I think it was malicious, but on the other hand, I think these guys were having some fun, sort of breaking into the site, kind of proving that they could do it more than anything else, is my guess.
But in a way, that can be just described as the polemics and hard-ass stuff that part of the history of journalism. I mean, journalism should never be too genteel because it's not what these people in the audience make documentaries. I mean, this is a rough business, isn't it? So, you get hoaxed, you get attacked, and that's that. No?
Criticism always goes outwards, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a problem, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I just kind of think that journalists are fine at, sort of rather hypocritically accusing everybody else or expecting them to meet certain standards that they don't necessarily meet themselves.
As an American living in Europe and watching the press coming out of my own country and watching the press and the activists that I see in other countries where WikiLeaks are active, I would completely agree with Vaughn that, I mean, this little cynical liberal Western bias and focus on our own media is such a big masturbatory festival, because
All right, well,
if you get down to what's actually happening
let's
in the
have
world,
some more masturbation. Get the next.
these cables are getting are getting pressed everywhere. They're getting printed everywhere.
Yeah. Next question.
Tessa Mays, I'm an investigative journalist and film director. I wanted to ask the panel whether you thought there was a case for saying there's too much transparency sometimes. And I say that as a journalist with, like everyone here, probably an instinct to expose, get the leaker, get the story out, but also now with concern that how can states generally and politically function if there's so much disloyalty at high levels by public figures, which in the end can backfire on all of us? Do we really need to hear warts and all about public figures and states?
Okay.
Should we be more targeted?
Great question. Judith, you want to start off on that?
Well, I was thinking, I don't think that I would call the leak from Bradley Manning disloyalty at high levels of public officials. It's a leak at the very lowest level of a private in the Army. So and it's the biggest leak in history. So that's probably not necessarily how it's going to happen. I think there is probably more loyalty at higher levels. But I think that the whole question of where the limits is an area that's got to be taken case by case and by policymakers and by people in governments that decide how what is really in the national security. I think the example that the Pentagon Papers has been declassified today, or I'm sorry, it will be on the 13th of June after 40 years when it was already published in the New York Times. I mean, the fact that the secrecy system has been so misused to mostly cover up mistakes made by people within the government rather than really be protecting the national security. I hope that there's some kind of collaboration and this kind of redaction, is that? Thank you, by members of the media that really can help to, and working in collaboration with people, military strategists and people who know what is in the national interest. If there really is national security, I think there is an agreement that we're not, that people who want transparent government don't want chaos. They want things that belong in the public interest, that the people have the right to know what their governments are up to, and short of things that are national security issues, and they're very small, that area that is national security. I think Dan Ellsberg has really pointed that out to me over time, what a tiny part of what the information out there is really a danger, and we just need to clarify what that is.
Do you want to follow up that question with one to James about maybe about this country, because it's a bit different from the United States?
Well, sorry, it's a bit loud. It is something that needs more discussion, I think. I think there has been a lot of sort of bravado and egos, as someone said earlier, about sort of suddenly become the journalist as hero, rushing towards an excessive amount of leaking, without maybe less debate about the considerations that you've just mentioned. So maybe now in a sober reflection period, as it were, we can have that discussion in this country a lot more, I think.
Well, this country leaks from the top every day. I mean, cabinet ministers brief to various degrees of accuracy and honesty and for their personal or political ends every single day. Exactly. I mean, we just accept that as a vital part of our political discourse, and it isn't all that different in the US. In terms of whether there's such a thing as too much transparency, of course there is, but I mean, that's an argument even Julian Assange comes to accept. I mean, you had the situation where most of the involvement of mainstream media and also a lot of voices within and around WikiLeaks was about encouraging them to move towards actual harm minimization, and I think actually moving people away from, say, the naive view on the Iraq and Afghan material that more, naming the dead or naming people who'd been tortured was a good thing, because everyone, including people in the files, were saying, please don't do this. So I think moving towards that position of transparency has its limits is there, but we're so far short of that. I mean, it's the control of information, all kinds of things are put out, measured and limited and shaped to the agenda of senior political actors. Mm-hmm. I think if people lower down are leaking through conscience, or even for their own petty ends, if it's just accepted as an okay part of culture at the top, just because it happens more, doesn't really mean it's okay. So, yeah, there's a limit to transparency, but I think we're so far short of it that I'm not sure it's really a core issue.
Vaughan, you want to answer?
I just want to
another question.
Quickly underline the fact that in every conversation I've had with Assange, he doesn't come across to me as a proponent of radical transparency. Quite the reverse. He's just trying to get us to think more about what should and shouldn't be secret. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'd say is that to understand this, we have to stand back from it. There's it's no good saying, oh, this should or shouldn't happen. It's happening because of the internet. Unless you want to disinvent the internet, this is just an organic or WikiLeaks is a biological development, an organic development from the internet as a communications device. And in a sense, interestingly, the internet is probably, I would argue, the best device to slander anybody you ever invented. It's extraordinary. Always unattributable
So you
content.
line up with basically the notion that the internet has abolished not only privacy but secrecy too.
Mm-hmm. Well, in many ways, but what I would say to counter that, it's slander. It doesn't really matter what's true, and this is where I think Julian's is doing us a service, trying to point out what is true. Frankly, you can slander anybody who has a brand or puts their head above a parapet on the internet in an unattributable way. There are companies that are doing it. This HB Gary Federal, which is getting millions of dollars a week to slander Julian Assange and target it's a dirty tricks campaign. Fueling the feuding groups, adding disinformation, creating messages around actions of sabotage or discredit.
That's not a game Julian rises above himself, of course.
No, that's not. But that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is we have to understand the internet. That we're missing the point by saying, oh, we'd like it to be different. Well, it's here. We've got to get used to the internet. What Julian has done is actually give us an opportunity, and what we should be doing is thinking about what we're going to do about it.
Okay, another question.
I'm Friedrich Moser. I'm a producer and director from Austria. What I'm wondering is how do we filmmakers fit into all this, in a kind of future perspective? All this, let's say, all this drama around WikiLeaks really started when they released this collateral murder video, so it was visual. And how do we get, in addition to all these written documents, how do we get our hands on visual material? And what do broadcasters expect from us, filmmakers, and what do, let's say, cross-media newspapers like The Guardian expect from us?
Well, you have the man who directed a one-hour film based on the Iraq material in the front row there, so you could certainly talk to him. But
Well, why not give him the microphone? He can answer it. Michael, you may, afterwards, maybe the two of you have things to say.
Hello, I'm Mark Sigsworth. I made the dispatches for Channel 4 based on the WikiLeaks leak of material about Iraq. And I mean, with the making of that programme, we made a very conscious decision that Julian Assange would not be in the programme. We wouldn't seek an interview with him. It wouldn't be a media story about the WikiLeaks phenomenon. It would purely be about material and what this told us about the Iraq War and the way it had been prosecuted. And what we did, as the simple structure of that programme essentially, was to look at public statements that had been made to us about the war by the American leadership, and how information that was in the leaked material from WikiLeaks contradicted that. And so we went through more or less statement by statement and show how, when the American leadership, both military and political, were saying certain things, they actually knew things that were very different, and they were actually behaving in a different way in private to the way that they were saying things in public. I think that was the main thing. And I think it also told you a lot about how things happened on the ground. One of the things that we did, for example, of course, this is written and digital material, but it gives you an opportunity. I mean, the material was recorded in a great deal of detail. It not only had people's names, but latitude and longitude, GPS references and things like that. So, for example, one of the stories that we told in the film was a story that we came across because it was filed under Al-Qaeda, and I ought to say it was very difficult to work on the deadline that we had with this program, because it was, as James has mentioned, I mean, James, we couldn't have made the program without James's great ability to sort of go through this colossal amount of data and look for things. But I mean, one story that just sort of seemed to leap out at us that we did tell in the film was, when it was filed under Al-Qaeda, was a story of a teenage boy being killed with a Hellfire missile. And we were able to tell that because there was precise information about where this boy had been killed, and we were able to send people to go to that place and hear the version of the people who were there and how that contrasted with what the Americans had told themselves in their own sort of journal of the event, for example. And of course, the Americans had told themselves they'd seen these boys by the side of the road, they were digging, and they therefore assumed that they were placing an IED with an intent to blow it up. And of course, what was later discovered, as later material showed, was that the boys are goat herds who had been digging up wood to make a fire for themselves. And the American response, rather than go and talk to them and say, who are you, what are you doing, identify yourself, was to put an Apache helicopter in the air and to fire a missile.
I want to get to it, but however, it seems to me that we all agree in this room that actually the WikiLeaks story has belonged to a mixture of the internet and print media. It's actually hasn't been very well covered on television, and you can't. It's possible to make documentaries about it, but the problem is that documentaries are really slow media rather than fast media. I mean, Judith, what do you think about that? If the future is a lot of high-speed leaking and transactions of that time, what do these filmmakers do about it?
Well, I was thinking there's this whole flurry of films about Julian Assange that are coming out. But when are they all going to get out? 2 years from now, maybe, or a year from now? I think that, yeah, we play a different role. I think that documentarians play a role sort of digging a little deeper and asking some of the deeper questions and going a little broader, and we aren't just feeding news. I was very impressed with how quickly you got that. No, you in the front row there with the that piece. I saw it. I was in England at the time for the press conference. I thought, how did they do that? But that's, you know, I think the kind of film I make where I try to look underneath and get into some of the characters and get into those are useful in terms of the bigger questions. And what you did, I thought, was really impressive to get that information out so quickly.
Michael, you want to come in on
Yeah.
this? Then there's another question.
To answer your question, Ruth Berry, who I want to thank for bringing us all together, these amazing people together to talk with you, said this morning at breakfast, what WikiLeaks is about free data. Mm-hmm. And what we're looking for as documentarians is stories. And if you want a story, pick any cable you want and do what he did. Yeah. Go and find the people. The problem is that it takes effort. And that was why WikiLeaks changed from being a collaborative, editable, collaborative document to a release site, is because people are not interested in making the effort. And so I think that as a citizen that we can't turn around and complain about our governments or our media not willing to make the effort if we're not willing to make the effort. And the internet, and I mean, to be really nasty here at the documentary conference where everybody's looking for funding for their documentaries, I mean, I'm sorry, go out there, shoot it, and put it up on the internet. And if the content's good, BBC's going to come knocking on your door.
That's unfortunately not necessarily the case, but never mind. Let's go.
I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yes, I do. No, I basically agree with you.
I just wanted to ask you about the trust, because the one thing that I noticed with WikiLeaks as an American was that after 9/11, a lot of things we had access to, we no longer had access to anymore, including things I'd used for articles and things. Also, when we'd written things before, you'd always have this answer, oh, we can't publish that because we'll be attacked legally. So they just go and put it out there, and people were being whistleblowers and trusted them. So can you talk a little bit about the trust aspect of this? I don't really care about Julian Assange.
Isn't that where we're at as a society? Isn't trust broken down in all of our institutions? Isn't Anonymous and WikiLeaks exactly about the fact that every single one of our institutions is not responding to the citizenry? I mean, trust is at the core of all of this.
You know, I think that, and this was something, there was an article about the 40th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers yesterday, and Dan Ellsberg said every single thing he did at the time was illegal, and legal, and now it's illegal because of the Patriot Act following 9/11. So yeah, we're in a country that's been definitely closed down.
Right, another question.
Yeah. So, sorry. As an activist, I do occasional work with Anonymous. Tom, I had nothing to do with the PBS hack. And yeah, I just wondering if you guys can comment a little more about that and sort of the ways in which the internet and phenomenon
well, I mean, maybe you
could
tell us. Like,
I'm sort
okay,
of. I mean,
here's
I know,
a big question that you can answer. Like, in what way has there been a sort of is WikiLeaks part of a sort of revolution in the way we get our information? And are you, as an activist, contributing to Anonymous? What are you actually doing?
I'm nothing illegal.
No, I mean, philosophically, what is your blueprint for the future by participating in this?
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I don't remember your name again.
Michael. But you know me as Exiled Surfer from online.
Okay.
James
I think he kind of hits on it, that sort of traditional politics and traditional journalism feels broken. I mean, it feels like it's just not working. And yeah,
I mean, there it is on the flag right there. I mean, right behind us at the moment. This is an anonymous graphic, which I'm sorry, it went forward.
Well, I want a very traditional, recently, traditional journalist, James, answer this. I basically don't agree with you at all. I'm chairing this, so I'm going to let James answer this.
I mean, I was working for WikiLeaks when Anonymous decided to come and really support it rather than sort of post offensive pictures and rickroll people for a while. I have to say it was kind of gratifying, and there was a certain extent to which it was funny seeing people who were absolutely screwing you up and causing you trouble, Libra and MasterCard Visa, be taken down. But ultimately it was an absolute pain in the arse. I really, really wish that Anonymous hadn't done it, because it helped nothing. It took off a couple of sites for a couple of days and made all the stories about hacking. Look at this group of hackers. Isn't hacking funny? Who are Anonymous? Who is this? It was a juvenile stunt, when actually it was kind of what should have been the focus there. And I think what was nearly the focus till Anonymous started going around hacking was, what the hell is happening that freedom of speech in the First Amendment has been superseded by a couple of companies, actually off the back of one senator. And we actually sort of, until the Anonymous stuff happened, a load of WikiLeaks revelations about Visa and MasterCard were being reported quite prominently, showing other behaviours that endorsed when it wasn't about that. And so Anonymous sort of came in there really well-intentioned and absolutely stuffed up the whole thing.
Sounds typical.
I'm not all that enamored of it.
Ask the panel. Vaughan, do you agree with the assertion that traditional media is basically broken beyond repair?
Before I will answer that, certainly, but first I would say what Anonymous did do that was right was this HB Gary thing, where it actually found information. I think if it finds information that is in the public interest, it's rather different than some sort of attack on things. I think that's what we'd probably agree on that. Yeah. Is traditional journalism broken? Not yet. I think in many ways this has reinforced it. I mean, the skills that journalists have been very essential to the public interest of these leaks, clearly. But I don't think journalism is really being damaged by WikiLeaks. I think it's been strengthened by it. I think it's the internet. Journalism has failed to build a model on the internet, and it's about to pay a heavy price for that.
But James, you've morphed from a agitator to proponent of traditional journalists in a very short time. Are you going to make your career in agitation or traditional journalism?
It's I think anyone who has, I think, to be honest, a lot of journalists are agitators. That's virtually the job, professional troublemakers, surely. I think we focus too much on the channels people use to do it. I mean, there's certainly with campaigning journalists, look at people like Pilger, there's no huge gap between people like him and activists of his era and so on. I think you've got a few journalists like me. I would say I'm probably a digital native, but I don't think I've suddenly switched from being some sort of online cyber hacker, I've never hacked a system in my life, to a staid pipe smoking, let's get it all in the paper, none of this web nonsense kind of. It's a false divide.
Brands are going to be.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Questions? Another question. You got more time.
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the phenomenon of anonymous, if I can. I mean, one thing that people forget about anonymous is that anybody can be anonymous, and it's not like talking about Al-Qaeda, which is also sort of anonymous. We're living in a time where labels are thrown around, and where it's easy to throw words out that supposedly wake up an idea in the public's mind. And anonymous is the new boogeyman. I mean, Osama bin Laden is dead, so who do we have? Oh, we've got the hackers, and what are they called? They're called anonymous. And I saw in the paper today, this morning when I was sitting at breakfast, there's an interview with Anonymous in The Independent. And I'm like going, okay, well, which anonymi are that? Anybody can call themselves anonymous. And so it's being bandied about now as the new boogeyman in the public sphere. And that says more about how it is that we're thinking about our society than actually the problems that our society has.
Okay, a question.
Hi. I'm interested in the issue you were talking about a bit before about the dangers for leakers. And I'm Deborah. I mean, the Ellsberg film I thought was fantastic. And one of the things that struck me when the Manning story broke was, I mean, a big part of that film is how incredibly difficult it was. And every night he snuck in there, there was no way not to know what you were doing. It was a long, thoughtful process. At any moment he could say, this is too scary, it's not worth the risk, I can go back. Whereas taking information electronically is, I would imagine, psychologically a very different thing. I'm not, how much are people aware of the risks? I mean, this isn't a question for us as journalists, but I'm curious in the psychology, the difference in what it means to leak and the potential danger for all sorts of people who want to jump in and say, I believe in this politically, I'm going to do it and do it without. So you could just talk about that a bit.
Well, Bradley Manning did state that he was willing to go to prison or be executed to leak this information. He felt that strongly about it. And I do think that what James was saying, and I think Vaughn as well, that there really is no safe way to leak. I mean, leaking is a very dangerous activity for many reasons. I mean, at least you lose your career, you lose usually your marriage, you lose if you have one, you lose, you lose the respect of the people you most admire. I think that's really a very hard thing to walk away from, and then you may end up spending your life in prison. So I think, and Bradley Manning, if anything, the government has tried really hard to make him such an example of how far they're going to go to punish someone who has the audacity to leak this kind of information. That, he's certainly been set up as a model of that. So it's a risky business. I don't think we're ever going to get around that.
We do have to be a bit careful with Bradley Manning. This is an alleged offence,
Exactly. I'm sorry, and I
we have to be a bit careful
too.
with this because it would be wrong for us to assume something we don't
really
know.
apologize. I'm in a family of lawyers.
and also, WikiLeaks didn't compromise. If the alleged Bradley Manning or whoever did this, WikiLeaks hasn't compromised them. If Bradley Manning was that person, he compromised himself. He gave that information away. So I'd just like to add to that earlier conversation. WikiLeaks has been pretty robust in protecting its sources. Also, I would argue that its reputation is based on the fact that it has the courage to actually push and it actively tries to make the best of those leaks. And I just think that's a facet of them.
I think we have to be careful talking about WikiLeaks security. If you had Googled, and in fact you can do it by restricting the date, Adrian Lamo, before about 2008, the first thing you would see is that he was named as one of the earliest donors and supporters of WikiLeaks. The reason that you would know that is because Julian Assange himself accidentally revealed his whole donor list.
February 11th, 2009 is the exact.
So that wasn't exactly a brilliant move. And pretty much the entire internal correspondence of the first year of WikiLeaks' inception, sort of to certainly a lot of its prominent supporters, including the person who first owned wikileaks.org, is available online because it leaked. I mean, this is not an organisation that is any better than any of the rest of us at holding on to its secrets. It just isn't. It doesn't have brilliant procedure. It doesn't have brilliant security. It loses control of its stuff. I mean, Vaughan is entirely correct in saying that Manning, if he was the source, was implicated because he chose to talk to someone. But he had reason to believe he was trustworthy. Could he have been protected if there'd been better policies, or if that leak hadn't have happened? Who knows? Who knows?
So what Adrian Lamo said to me 3 days ago via interview online was that the reason why Bradley started speaking with him is because he was getting no response from WikiLeaks after he had given the material, and he felt that he was now irrelevant. And so he was looking for attention from Adrian, and that's how he started talking to him. And that's how Bradley ended up getting turned in by Lamo, had nothing to do with WikiLeaks. I mean, he had given the information, and because WikiLeaks behaves the way that it behaves, this is all allegedly, by protecting sources, not wanting to know who they are, not wanting to communicate with people after they have the information so that they protect them. It was Bradley's own personal action that brought him into prison. It had nothing to do with WikiLeaks or with him providing them with the information.
I think
that's the story that the government wants you to believe.
We're approaching the moment we have to wind up, but I would like to ask you, whoever you want to respond to, a last question. That is, can we go 10 years into the future, and can we speculate at all, firstly, whether the WikiLeaks brand will have expanded enormously or shrunk to nothing? The second question is, related question is, will there be sort of imitators of WikiLeaks all over the place, not just in The Guardian or the BBC, but let's say in China? The third possibility, obviously, is that really this is all about nothing in particular, and there'll just be a sort of the usual stalemate of governments trying to keep secrets and people trying to wrest secrets from governments. So which do you think is most likely? Start with you, Vaughan.
It's very hard to work out what WikiLeaks itself is going to look like in 10 years' time. What I do think, though, is I'm convinced that history will be kind to WikiLeaks. I think young people are more likely to be supportive, and I think they don't quite understand what the problem is, because they don't seem to have an investment in the sort of infrastructures, the cozy consultancies that seem to be threatened by WikiLeaks. The other thing is the Arab Spring. Whatever one thinks about the Arab Spring, WikiLeaks has played a role in triggering it, in my view. I think as a story, it's bigger than the Berlin Wall. And so, yes, I don't know whether WikiLeaks will still be doing it, but I think its brand is secure. It's fundamentally breached the wall. Probably get away with it.
So I think you don't put genies back in bottles. I mean, I think whatever happened, organisations like WikiLeaks are now here, but Google wasn't the first search engine. Windows wasn't the first operating system. The first organisation isn't always the one that really makes it work. I really doubt whether, unless WikiLeaks can move past Julian and actually start building the processes and the systems it likes to boast about, it will do anything other than burn out or wither. But what it's accomplished won't. I think there's now an awareness and an understanding in this area that just wasn't there before, and I think however much people would like to go back to a pre-WikiLeaks world, it isn't. It's just not going to happen. But my suspicion is WikiLeaks probably won't be, and certainly not in its current form, won't be at the head of it.
Judith.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you about that, and I think that it's just, the cat's out of the bag, all of everything you can say about this, there's no way of going back. And I think what it's done is really given us a sense of the power of the internet and how much it's changed everything. And the media, I think, is really now going to be a multi-platform media. We're being asked at this conference and everywhere in our lives as documentarians to think about cross-platform. I think it's just the way the reality is from here on out, and where it's going to land, I don't know. I think WikiLeaks will be looked back on as a favorable thing, though.
Michael, do you want to give a last summing up?
I think everything has changed. I think that it's just an amazing amount of dialogue that's going on. And that's the legacy of WikiLeaks, is that there are more people from more walks of life, in more cultures, in more countries, of more different age groups, talking about this sort of stuff than there ever was before this happened. And it's a total paradigm shift. In the end, it's irrelevant which data WikiLeaks released with the cable dump. What's changed is the culture of perception that we all have, and I think that's just fabulous.
On that note, thank you all very much, panelists. Thank you for such good questions. I hope you enjoyed it.